Welcome everyone to the Urban Flowers webinar. I'm Serena Lewin and I'm one of the workshops and education coordinators at GreenThumb, the division of the NYC Parks Department that works with community gardens across the city. Thanks so much for being here today. This is our second seminar of the day. Maybe you joined us this morning, or maybe this is the first workshop that you're joining for the 30th annual Grow Together, but either way, we are so happy to have you here. As you see, we're joined by Cristian. Cristian is a senior in the agriculture program at John Bowne. Is that how you pronounce it? John Bowne? Bowne?
Yes, it's John Bowne.
Okay, John Bowne High School with a huge passion for everything agriculture. You can find Cristian on Instagram at cluckcluckmoo, which we will put in the chat so you can give him a follow. And without further ado, Cristian, feel free to share your screen and you have the mic.
Flowers. You can go to the next slide.
All right, hold on.
So just a little content synopsis of today's agenda. We're going to cover lots of material, so get excited. So I'm going to talk about watering and sun for flowers, fertilizing them, in different situations. So this is an urban how-to, so I'm going to include places to grow like containers, windowsills, garden beds, and tips and tricks on how to do that, and what types of flowers to plant depending on the growing situation. A big topic of this workshop is going to be seeding. So how to seed, how to read a seed packet, direct sowing, pre-germination. I'm going to touch on overwintering, and then I have a short little list of my handpicked favorite flowers to grow that I'm going to gift to you guys. And then last is a bonus content, which you'll see soon. So this webinar will cover instruction to successfully grow flowering plants from seed to mature plant. Your garden is definitely going to be the best looking garden in your whole block this year because of all this new information and all the new flowers that you're going to be able to grow after this workshop. So first, before we get into picking flowers and seeding, first we need to decide where we want to grow our plants. So if you thought that because you live in an urban situation that you don't have many options, there are more options than you think, and we're going to get creative. So let's see where we could plant. So I picked out 4 different growing situations for us to focus on, and the first is pots. I personally love pots because you could go out to the garden center, have a nice little day out, and pick out some decorative pots that you could place in your balcony, patio, really anywhere, to just make a centerpiece for your garden or a little vignette of a trio of pots, and just pick out a nice arrangement of potted plants that you could put in there to show off. Next, you have a windowsill. So if you have a little ledge in front of your windowsill, that's a perfect place to place little small flowering plants that could add a perfect touch of color to your home. And a little bonus of that is that your plants are always going to have a nice amount of sun because they're right there next to the window. So you won't have to worry about that. Next, we have window boxes. So this is something that not a lot of people think about. If you have a nice safe window around your home, you could place a window box, and then you could also do the same thing like pots, pick a nice little arrangement of flowers, and you could plant them in there. You can make it seasonal for the holidays or for summer, and then that could also be fun. And lastly, you have the garden bed. So lots of people think that garden beds should just be for edible plants, or if you just focus on edible plants like vegetables, you may want to change it up. So start adding flowering plants in there, which could add more blooms for the pollinators to be attracted to then also benefit your edible plants. And an even better twist, if you think of what edible flowering plants you could add in, like nasturtiums and other plants like that, to still have the edible aspect, but also the decorative aspect in your garden bed. So after we seen where we want to grow our plants and figured out what materials we need to gather, an important topic that I wanted to touch on, and something that we usually skip, is reading a seed packet. So some important factors, 3 important factors that are on a seed packet that we missed are the size of the plant, germination help, and care requirements. So knowing the size of the plant is important because we see how much space we need to accommodate for our plant to keep it happy and growing. And this is going to help us figure out what situation we want to put our plant in. For example, we don't want to put a huge mammoth sunflower in a small 6-inch pot because that just isn't realistic. And then germination help. So it's important to find out how to seed and care for your seeds for the best germination rate, because we don't want to buy a pack of seeds and then we direct sow them when we shouldn't be direct sowing, and then we don't have success with that. And then lastly, general care requirements with your mature plants. So if your plant needs full sun or prefers a shady spot under tree canopy, you're going to be prepared and you're going to know what to give it to have the best healthy plant. I wanted to include a little seasonal flower guide for everyone, just to give you inspiration on what you could start now or start in the future. So an important aspect of reading a seed packet or picking out your plants is knowing when you want to purchase them or when you want to seed them for them to fall in the specific season that they grow their best in. So I just provided three flowering plants for each season, that you could refer back to for later, and just so you could be prepared. Because if you're planning to start canna lilies or you're purchasing your canna lilies for the winter, that's not going to be the best growing situation for them because they prefer summer conditions. Next slide. So now that we found out where we want to plant our seeds, how to read a seed packet, and when we want to start our seeds, then now we can move on to actually seeding. So there, if you didn't know that there's different ways, now you will know. And we have 2 different ways. So we have direct sowing and pre-germination. Direct sowing is perfect for plants that call for a cold period in order to properly germinate. So plants like lupins want the cold spell in order to successfully grow in the warmer months. So direct sowing would be the best for them. And the way that you do this is by sprinkling seeds in the area where you want, over the snow or cold ground, and then lightly pat. But if you don't have a plant that requires a cold spell in order for them to properly germinate, direct sowing could also be easy if you don't have the space or materials to pre-germinate seeds indoors. Because I know in the past summer, I wanted to start like 10 different flowers, and then it took a massive amount of space for pre-germination. So direct sowing would have been best for my situation, in that, for what I wanted to do in the garden. So yeah, so you should just do that to make it easier on yourself in the warmer months. But if you really want a head start for your plants and you want to start them indoors and you have a nice, warm, humid environment for them to germinate, then you should just do pre-germination. So you want to provide that warm, humid environment for them to germinate. And then you could transfer the seedlings when they're a little more mature outside. And then this method will ensure that you're getting a higher germination rate because you're able to control their environments and you're not dealing with the outside weather. So seed aftercare is really important. I found that this part is where gardeners tend to have mishaps, and then that's when they get um, not encouraged to continue with other plants and seeding other plants to then growing out in the landscape. So watering is the most important aspect out of these 3, because if you miss a watering, then your seeds are going to show it. You're going to have casualties, and keeping a consistent watering schedule is a must. Definitely, that's what I've experienced. We're dealing with delicate seedlings and they need consistent water in order to grow. Next is sun. You need sun. Seeds need consistent indirect light to grow. We want strong, nice, healthy leaves that you could transfer out into your garden or your pots. And that is done by providing indirect sunlight and harsh direct light can cause them to shrivel up, can cause premature drying of the soil, and you're going to need to keep up a lot of times during the week watering, which we may not have time for, and then we might miss a watering. And then lastly, humidity. Humidity helps keep seeds moist for longer and helps them growing because of that warm environment. But it's not a must. And the way that you could promote humidity is by having a humidity dome or those plastic clear tops for the seed trays. So that could help if you want humidity with your seeds. So now we have Cristian's starter pack. So I picked out these flowers because they're the most easiest and most flexible in my experience growing. So you're going to have success with these and they're going to look great. So let's dive into it. First, we have zinnias. So we have varieties for days. There's so many types of varieties of zinnias. On the right here on your screen, we have a more simple, dainty variety of zinnia, but we have a more round shape, a big, nice circular shape. There's ones that look really ruffly, that have thin little papery leaves. They're also great for pollinators. And when I say that they can be manipulated, I mean that if you pick a zinnia and you put it in a window box or you have it in a pot and it gets too big, then you could prune it and you won't have many issues with bloom cycles. So other plants, other flowering plants may not appreciate such a harsh prune, and then that can negatively affect their bloom cycle. But zinnias are very forgiving. So they're immediately going to start growing new stems with new blooms, and you're able to take down the size. Next flower are marigolds. So again, we have many varieties, many different colors. On the left, this is an African yellow marigold with a more roughly round dome shape. We have the flat marigolds that have the singular round of leaves. And they're dark red, dark orange. We even have white marigolds, bright yellow marigolds like this one that you're seeing. They smell amazing. So that's a plus, and they're compact, but they have potential to grow into a nice big bush if you allow them to. And they're also great for projects, which I'm going to touch on later. And then last but not least, we have sunflowers. So typically when we think of sunflowers, we think about this huge, tall, 8-foot, like 12-inch diameter sunflower. But that's not the case. So this sunflower is one that I grew 2 summers ago in a 6-inch pot, and it bloomed for me with multiple blooms. It was great. It was healthy. So there's definitely lots of varieties that are flexible for different growing situations. If you have pots or if you have a garden bed, you could definitely choose if you want the smaller types or the bigger types. And who could pass down a sunflower? They just make you automatically happy, and they have that edible aspect of after they're done blooming, the seeds will grow, and then you could eat the seeds or save them for next year. So we went over a lot. We went over how to read seed packets, where to even plant the seeds, different growing situations, seedling care. So now we have mature plant care. So the Happy Plants Guide, how to keep your mature plants happy and healthy. So we have watering. So keep the care requirements of the plants in mind. So this goes back to reading the seed packet. If you did your homework, then you're going to know whether your plant wants more dry or moist conditions. And just a tip, during the hottest months, you want to make sure that your flowers have a constant supply of water. And a drop in water can cause blooms to shrivel, and that can negatively affect the bloom cycle. So you want to make sure that if you're in the middle of August, over 100 degrees, you just want to go out there a couple times a day, make sure that your plants are happy and watered, to have the best, healthiest full plant that you can. And then sun. Flowering plants in particular need a lot of sun for their blooms, since the plant is working on the extra energy for the blooms. So you want to make sure if you have a plant that needs high sun, that they have that, or a plant that needs shade has the shade. because again, it's all about the blooms. You want to make sure that they're doing good. And then a little tip for the sun is to make sure that the sun isn't burning the leaves, because burnt leaves is leaf damage, and then the leaves are not able to produce photosynthesis, and then that means a decrease in blooms. Fertilization needed. So adding organic fertilizer underneath plants can help the plant produce bigger and better blooms for picking or to enjoy. So of course, fertilization isn't 100% needed, but I personally recommend that you fertilize your flowering plants, because that will just make them bigger and better and just leave the year out, the season out with a bang. And then once we think of fertilizing, we only think of like physical, water soluble, or organic. But actually, something that I've noticed is that if your flowering plant is having trouble fertilizing itself, if you're having a decrease in pollinators, then you're actually able to jump in with a little Q-tip and just go from flower to flower and help pollinate the blooms if you want seeds. Or if your flowering plant produces a fruit, then that could also help with the fertilizing if you go in. Something interesting that I also wanted to touch on is overwintering a plant. So if you love your flower that you planted and you know that it's an annual and not a perennial, then you can overwinter it. So what is overwintering? You just want to create a nice semi-warm environment that you can keep the plant in indoors. So making sure that your plant is not a perennial in your area is very important, because if it is a perennial, then you could just keep it outside. Make sure that the root ball is nicely covered. If it's buried in the landscape, make sure that it has mulch, so it doesn't die off, and make sure that it's healthy. But if it is an annual, then again, create the nice semi-warm environment, minimum humidity, indirect, medium to low light, and keep the watering to very little to no water, because we don't want to keep the plant growing all year. That's gonna decrease the amount of energy and how full and lush the plant becomes. So you just want to let it go dormant and then bring it back outside when the season starts. Now for the bonus. So I wanted to include flower DIYs and hacks that you could try out with your friends and family to really enjoy the blooms in your landscape the most that you can. So I have 3 ways, and the first way is flower arrangements. I love to make flower arrangements with the flowers that I grow. It's so fun. You get to give them as gifts to your family, and not only enjoy your blooms outdoors, but also indoors. So you could just practice your arranging with all your flowers that you've grown. And that's super cool to say that, oh, I grew that arrangement outside. Next, something that I've personally never done, but sounds so cool, is to make salves or tea. So if you have edible blooms that you want to harvest, dry, and make tea or extract oils out of them. So some examples that you could make salves and tea out of is lavender, calendula, even marigolds. You could extract the oils out of them and include them in skincare and salve. And those also make perfect gifts. And then lastly, you could save your seeds. So if you love your flowers and you don't want to overwinter, you could save the seeds. So here pictured above is a pea or bean. So some peas and beans have flowers. So if you want to just save the flowers for next year, you could make it a great learning experience for kids to teach about the plant life cycle, or you could just have fun, collect dry seed pods. You want to make sure that the seed pod is fully dry. You want to deadhead the flower, which means cut the seed pod off of the flower, and then you could just bring it inside, dump all the seeds out, discard of any extra dried leaves or the seed pod, and keep the seeds in a nice, dry, dark environment for next year. But we've reached the end of the workshop. I covered a lot of material, so just a brief summary. We went over how to read a seed packet, different growing environments to get creative on for including different flowering plants into all situations around urban environments, picking out seeds, how to care for seedlings, the fun bonus, the starter pack, and overwintering and fertilization. So that's a lot of information for you to get in your garden, get busy growing flowers, and have fun. But if you need any resources, if you want to reach out, you could reach me on Instagram at @cluckluckmoo, or you could reach and you could check my website, www.cluckluckmoo.com. Or if you want to directly ask me a question, or if you need help, cluckluckmoo@gmail.com for my email. So thank you for coming to my workshop. Now it's time for questions.
Thank you so much, Cristian. That was so great. Ellie's gonna hop in and be our Q&A host. She's been collecting questions in the chat for the whole workshop. So take it away, Ellie.
Awesome. Yeah, just to echo Serena, thanks so much, Cristian. You've definitely inspired some awesome questions in the chat, which I've pulled for this Q&A. So to get us started, someone is really looking forward to growing edible flowers this season, and they're wondering which ones are easy to grow and fast growing.
I have a lot of experience with growing nasturtiums. I love nasturtiums because they look great. Their leaves are so cool. And their flowers are super interesting. First, the look of the nasturtium is really cool. And it's always just a talking point. If you bring someone out to the garden and you see these bright orange, yellow, tropical, viney looking flowers, and you're like, oh, let me just eat one. And then like, that's so cool. So they actually have a peppery taste, perfect for garnishing salads or greens. So that's definitely an easy one that you could start off with and then branch out to more difficult ones.
Awesome. Along the lines of easy flower growing, a couple of people have had trouble with mildew on their zinnias, and they're wondering if you've encountered this and if you can share any tips about how to mitigate mildew.
Yeah, so mildew is definitely a big issue that I've experienced with zinnias, but the biggest help that I've found out in my experience is make sure to keep the pruning to like heavy. So you want to thin out your seeds if you start them from seed to have proper airflow, because that's the biggest cause of mildew is high moisture, low airflow. So you want to prune any leggy branches, any branches without blooms that you don't want. If the leaves are starting to get mildewy, maybe cut off the leaves at the base of the plant to get more airflow going. So yeah, definitely. And if you're watering so if you're having a wet season, then you can't really do anything about like the moisture, but just definitely keep pruning. But if you're finding mildew and it's a dry season, then cut down a little bit on the water just to decrease the amount of moisture and humidity around the base of the plant.
Okay, and now I'm just going to pivot briefly to our Spanish interpreters. Andrea has, are there any questions from those on the other audio channel? Or Jose? Feel free to just throw them in the chat and I'll read them aloud too. So another question is about fertilizer. Do you use fertilizer, and what would you recommend for indoor plants?
Yeah, so phosphorus is the most important additive when you want nice blooms. So there's 3 aspects of a fertilizer, and that's NPK, or nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. So you want to look for the highest level in phosphorus for your plants. So you're always going to see 3 numbers on the front of a fertilizer container or bag, and you just want to look for the highest amount of phosphorus. So always remember NPK, phosphorus, and then you could pick out that type of fertilizer. But organic fertilizers work good. I always try to work organic, but water soluble fertilizers with high amount of phosphorus or flower specified growing medium would also work.
Have you ever used worm castings before? And do you think they're helpful for within the tree bed for fertilizing plants?
Yeah. So I've worked with soils or other fertilizers that have worm castings in them, and I've definitely noticed that helps. I've worked with a project that actually tried to make worm castings, so that was also cool if you want to give it a try with the red wiggler worm and make your own worm castings. But another thing that I've worked with was fish emulsion. So if you want to look for that at your garden center, try different, a little experiment with different fertilizers like worm castings versus fish emulsion. Both work, and you could see which one works better.
Cool. Someone is wondering about lavender plants. Can we, as New Yorkers, start a lavender plant from seed in our zone? Kind of a specific question.
I actually found out that lavender is not the best grower in our zone, specifically because of soil conditions and how hot it gets. But definitely you could give it a try. I've never tried seeding lavender out in the landscape. I've tried it with like small starter plants. But yes, I've noticed that they don't grow as big because we have such clay soil. So definitely adding other additives like compost, organic material, maybe a wood chip would help.
Great. Continuing down the Cristian recommendation path, someone's wondering, what are the best flowering plants for a shade garden? I know that's a common problem that people have with apartment buildings and not getting full sun. What would you recommend?
I always love pansies. Pansies are great. If you have any coleus, coleus is not known for its blooms, but its foliage is really nice. Almost resembles a bloom. Very nice, flashy colors, or could look really regal and elegant. So coleus and pansies are nice. Ivy is also good, but make sure to watch your ivy that it's not taking over because it is invasive, so watch out. So definitely keep that in pots, but like a pot with a nice coleus, a dark burgundy coleus, a nice white or yellow pansy, and then an ivy would be really nice and stunning.
Awesome. The coleus, someone's wondering about any deep blue or purple flowers that are easy to grow and or bloom for long periods. Would a coleus be a nice direction to point them to for this rec?
So coleus stay more like reddish, like or like warm colors. So I would say for cool colors, you could try hydrangeas. Hydrangeas are really nice. So in this zone in New York, you could add more acidic fertilizers or soil acidifier to get them to that nice blue. So I would also recommend lupins, which I talked about. That's really nice. A nice cone. What is it? Connular? Like a nice cone, tall, shaped bloom with a nice blue color that adds a lot of interest to a garden. Yeah. And also pansies are fun. Pansies come in like blues and purples.
Awesome. I know we might be nearing the end of our Q&A session, so I'm going to pull a couple more questions from our list. And let's see. Ooh, do you recommend pruning back larger varieties of marigolds since they can become so bushy? Can you talk about the best way to prune marigold bushes?
Definitely. So you don't want to prune the marigold bush all the way down to its base. You want to prune like 2 to 3 inches, or just depending. you could take it down halfway, but there's really no specific way. You just cut it because then the little intersections of the branches are going to make more branches, and then that's where you get your blooms. Yeah.
Awesome. Wow, you really, your wealth of knowledge is very I'm flexing right now.
Thank you.
Oh, and someone had a bunch of great Snapdragons last year, but then they stopped blooming. Someone's wondering what they did wrong.
All right. Snapdragons are a perennial here, from what I've experienced, so that's definitely cool. So you could try fertilizing a little more. They like their fertilizer, and maybe you had inconsistent watering, because once they start drying out, then their blooms immediately start browning and wilting, and then that could lead to like a shortage in blooms. So definitely keep on top of water and maybe add a little fertilizer.
Okay. Serena's noted that due to our late start, we're gonna extend our Q&A a little bit longer. So someone is wondering about native perennials. Which one, first of all, do you have, can you speak a little bit like native plants and also maybe name some native perennials that would grow faster than weeds?
Yeah. So there's a few ferns that are native to New York. So those are really nice to add some interest. There's some asters. Goldenrod or solidago is a nice yellow, long, like pointy arrow shaped bloom. But that's basically a weed at this point here. Um, but yeah, I don't really have lots of experience with native plants for New York here. But I would definitely recommend ferns. Asters are nice. Yeah.
Cool. Circling back to soil enrichments, have you used compost tea in the past? We'd all love to hear a little bit more about that process and what it's like.
Yes. So I've had experience with making my own compost at school, and was part of a compost leadership group, in partnership with Queen's Botanical Garden. So you want to start off with a nice, healthy compost. So that means making sure that it's fully well developed all the way. So good compost should not have any smell. It should be well refined. Should look like dirt, basically. So you want to make sure that you're leaving it for as much time as it needs, making sure that you're including enough browns and organic material, and that it's like half and half. So that's a big tip. And then compost tea, you're just adding water to the compost to then make it like a liquid. Yeah, so then you just add it on top of your plant. And I found that it works. So compost works. Compost is a great additive to soil, to all plants. So just making it a tea is even easier and better.
Cool. I'll also note that GreenThumb Gardens can request compost deliveries to their garden sites. So I'm sure some of our outreach coordinators on our Slack channel can speak to some compost tea knowledge. Okay. I know you touched on this a little bit more, but you already touched on this in your presentation, but someone's wondering if you can speak a little bit more about indoor flower recs, what flowers you enjoy growing indoors.
Yeah, of course. I actually have here next to me a begonia. This is an angel wings begonia. So begonias are known for their blooms, for their long, stringy clusters of blooms. So these are more easier to get to bloom than maybe a Hoya. Hoyas are also nice succulent type waxy binding plants. So those are known in the houseplant world to for their flowers that sometimes smell like chocolate or perfume. but those are way harder to bloom and you need lots of sun and a very humid environment. But then also I have my Christmas cactus, which is blooming really easy, blooming house plant. So those would just be like 3 really easy blooming plants to have at home. Yeah.
Nice. My Christmas cactus never blooms at the right time. It's such a lost cause. So I feel you. Someone's wondering about flower recommendations for compacted soil. They're hoping to plant flowers on the sidewalks where the soil can be pretty
Yes.
compacted.
Yeah, I would say cosmos are great for that. Cosmos grow anywhere at this point. I found that if you have cosmos in one place here in New York, then you're gonna have a whole big patch of them. Nothing kills them. So if you have good water, good sun, then they should do great on the sidewalk.
Awesome. Someone's wondering about pansies. As we all know, they can get kind of leggy as the summer goes on. Do you have tips on the best way to revive them and keep that legginess at bay?
Yeah. So pansies, their season is usually early spring to early winter. So the reason why they get leggy is because of all that sun. So usually in the early spring or late winter, they have less sun, less opportunity for them to get leggy. So I would definitely say cut them back. Bring them to a shadier spot. If you have them in a full sun spot, then definitely bring them back to a partly indirect sun shady spot because they like shade. So that should reduce the legginess a bit and keep them more compact. You would think that more sun would cause them to become less leggy, but in my experience, it's the opposite since they are a shade-loving plant. But yeah, they're super easy to prune and then they grow right back. So you should just move them to a separate spot, or just keep in mind that you want to purchase your pansies early in the spring. So I would say like now would be a good time to purchase your pansies, and keep them on the side. Actually, no, like wait a few weeks because we're still getting freezing temperatures. But yeah, so like now would be a good time, or in a few weeks, and then early on in the winter.
Awesome. I'm also seeing in the chat someone suggests for compacted soil, native plants are great because they're adapted for the climate and
Yes.
they love the challenging soil. So that's also another tip. Thanks everyone for adding all this awesome knowledge in the chat too. What are the best milkweed plants to grow to attract butterflies or moths? Do you have any plant recs to attract butterflies or moths? And do they work around tree beds?
Yeah, so milkweeds are great around tree beds. There's a whole bunch of type of milkweeds out there. So I don't have a lot of experience with milkweeds, so I don't want to touch too much on that. But what I do know is that there's specific types of milkweeds for specific types of butterflies and pollinators. So I know that the monarch butterfly needs a specific type of milkweed that it will eat. So definitely keep that in mind. If you have like a whole bunch of different milkweeds, then you may want to research what the monarch butterfly wants, if that's what you want in your garden to attract that specific butterfly. But milkweeds are great for any environment. They're great in shade, full sun, they're adaptable, their blooms are really nice. Yes, but also be careful because they are poisonous. So yeah, just keep that in mind.
Ooh. Noted. Thanks for flagging that. By the way, Mickey in the chat mentioned that they have a 40-plus-year-old Christmas cactus that has never bloomed since they inherited it from their grandmother. So we might consider ourselves lucky that we get a bloom.
Yeah.
speaking of succulents, someone's wondering if you could share any tips on growing succulents from seed. Seed being, I think, more of a cutting, right?
Yeah, so succulents, if you're lucky enough to gather seeds from succulents, that's really cool. If you have seeds, succulent seeds, and you would just grow them like any other seed. Have a thin layer of soil, spray it down, don't have it soaked. Sprinkle the seeds on there and just wait for your little tiny succulents to appear. And then once you do, be consistent with a mist of water, don't drench them. But if you do have a cutting, you want to cut it from the succulent, let it callus over for 3 days. You don't want to put that fresh cut into the soil because that could introduce bacteria and then cause your succulent cutting to not grow. So you want to let it brown over on the cut for around 3 days, and then that's when you could put it into moist soil. Again, not soaked, just moist, and then you could let it root from there.
Cool. Circling back to soil amendments, what about adding coffee grounds or tea leaves to the soil? Have you done that? What's that like?
Yeah, I've done tips in other workshops where that was like a little hack, like tips and tricks to include that as soil amendments. So there are some amendments like orange peels, eggshells that are myths. So that takes a long time to actually decompose and include into the soil and allow the plants to actually use them up. But coffee grounds are great. They're a great additive to add nitrogen into the soil and to allow plants to grow happy.
Cool. A follow-up question for that is Nettle Compost Tea. Have you used that before? What does that do for the soil?
Nettle Compost Tea? Did I hear that right?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, yeah. So I actually don't know what that is. That's cool. I would definitely have to research it later. That sounds interesting. But I'm assuming that it's similar just to a regular compost tea. So just steep it and put it over the plant, and it should do good.
Cool. I'm not sure who's asked that question, but if you want to speak a little bit more to that, please throw it in the chat. I'm very interested to know more. It seems like it's a stinging nettle compost tea. And just to wrap up our Q&A, and I'll also say if you have more questions for Cristian, feel free to follow him or visit his website, Cluck Cluck Moo Moo. Someone's wondering, can a paperwhite bulb bloom again? How do you get a bulb to bloom more than once?
Yes. So they're yearly, so they're perennial. So once you have your paperwhites blooming and they're done and you're satisfied, you want to let the plant fully brown up. So just for all that excess energy after the bloom to go back into the bulb. And then you could just trim all the leaves off and store it in a nice, dark, cool environment until next year. Same with amaryllis, you like commonly purchased for the holiday season. Once you're done with your amaryllis blooming, you want to let all the leaves go to brown, and then you want to trim it off. Same thing, cool, dark environment. Same things with forest daffodils, hyacinths, snowdrops, stuff like that. You could transfer the daffodils, paperwhites, even snowdrops out into the landscape if you want to. Like for nature to handle the storing and reblooming for next year. Yeah, so it's a 1 year thing, like a once a year thing, and then you could just store them and then take them out and do the same thing that you did to get them to bloom again next year.
Awesome. I love that. Getting bulbs to rebloom is such a nice reminder of the type of time that gardening forces us to work on. It really
Yeah.
makes us, be thankful for something that happens once a year. I think we're just about at time. Thanks so much for all of these awesome questions. And they keep coming in. If you guys want to continue the conversation on our Slack channel, we're all going to be hanging out there and answering questions, and would also love to hear more from you all about your tips on gardening and starting stuff from seed. Thanks so much. Serena, back to you.